The Black Sea civilization buried beneath the waves. The sea has always been a place of mystery. To the human eye, it is both a source of life and a graveyard of secrets. We look at its calm surface and imagine nothing but waves and currents. Yet beneath that vast expanse lies silence, a silence so profound that it becomes almost oppressive, as if the ocean itself is protecting something it does not want to surrender. The Black Sea is perhaps the most powerful example of this paradox. To most, it is a body of water separating Europe from Asia, a highway of trade and a theater of wars. But to those who dare to look deeper, it is something else entirely. It is a vault, a time capsule, a cemetery of a civilization lost to memory. When the first explorers and archaeologists began to suspect that entire settlements might lie drowned beneath its waves, the world of history shuddered with unease. Because if it were true, then the Black Sea is not simply another geographic feature, but a witness to a catastrophe that changed humanity forever. Imagine fertile lands that once stretched where there is now nothing but endless blue. Imagine villages built on those shores, their people confident that the earth beneath their feet was permanent. They planted crops, they built homes, they raised children, they dreamed of the future. And then one day, the world betrayed them. The waters rose, swallowing their land, their lives, their memory. The surface we see today is not the Black Sea as it was, but the result of a disaster so immense that its echo still lingers in myths and legends. Thousands of years later, scientists describe the Black Sea as unique among oceans. Its lower layers are depleted of oxygen, a condition that makes it unlike almost any other body of water on Earth. Because of this, objects resting on its seabed do not decay as quickly as they would elsewhere. Wood can survive for centuries. Bones remain intact. Entire ships have been found in astonishing condition, their timbers preserved by the toxic, airless depths. If ships, made only to last a handful of years, can remain untouched for millennia, what of homes, tools, or even human remains? What if a civilization, erased by the flood, has been waiting all this time beneath the waters, preserved in silence, waiting for us to remember it? And here lies the true enigma. The Black Sea does not just hold fragments of history. It holds the possibility of rewriting the very story of humanity. Archaeologists have found evidence that thousands of years ago, before the flood, its basin was not a sea at all, but a lake, surrounded by fertile lands and inhabited by people who thrived along its shores. Some believe this sudden flood could have been the origin of the great deluge stories found in sacred texts across the world. Could it be that the biblical flood, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Greek tale of Deucalion all stem from the same ancient trauma? Could the myths that still live in our collective memory be faint whispers of a single catastrophe that began here in this very sea? The mind cannot help but wonder. Was this drowned land merely home to scattered villages, or was it something far greater? A cradle of culture, a place where humanity first learned to build, to trade, to believe? If true, then the Black Sea would not only be the site of a tragedy, but the birthplace of legends, a point where history and mythology converge. Each dive into its depths is not only an act of science, but of resurrection. Every artifact retrieved is a voice returning from silence, a reminder that we are not as far from our forgotten past as we imagine. But perhaps the greatest mystery of all is not what we have found, but what we have not. The sea is vast. Its depths are dangerous. What little we know is a fraction of what remains. Think of the pages of a book, most of them missing, leaving us with only fragments of a story whose meaning we can only guess at. We know enough to be certain something extraordinary lies below, but not enough to grasp its scale, its complexity, its truth. It is this tension between knowledge and silence that makes the Black Sea one of the most haunting enigmas of our time. Every culture fears being forgotten. Every civilization builds monuments, writes stories, carves stone, all to resist the erasure of time. But what happens when the earth itself betrays you, when your entire world is submerged in a single generation? You vanish. Yet in vanishing, you endure, because memory is not only carved in stone. It lingers in myth, in whispers, in the depths of seas that refuse to release their dead. The Black Sea is not just a sea. It is the memory of a world erased, still waiting to be heard. The story of the Black Sea cannot be told without speaking of the flood. Not a gentle rise of waters over centuries, not the slow erosion of coasts we see today, but a cataclysm, a rupture. A single moment in time when the world changed forever. For generations, scholars have debated what truly happened here. Geological evidence suggests that thousands of years ago, the Black Sea was not a sea at all, but a vast freshwater lake surrounded by fertile plains. People lived along its shores, farming, fishing, and building their lives in what must have seemed a secure and permanent paradise. Then something happened that shattered that illusion of permanence. The prevailing theory is known as the Black Sea Deluge. Around 7,000 years ago, rising global sea levels caused by melting glaciers pushed the Mediterranean higher and higher until its waters breached the Bosporus. Imagine a wall of ocean forcing its way into the lake, carving channels with unstoppable force. Within months, perhaps weeks, water surged into the basin at a rate unimaginable to us today. Estimates suggest that the water level rose by several hundred feet, flooding an area of land larger than many modern nations. Fields, forests, villages, everything swallowed whole. It was not a slow drowning but a roar, an invasion of the sea that could not be resisted. Picture the people who lived there. One day they woke to familiar routines, their children playing along the banks, their animals grazing in meadows. The next, the horizon itself seemed to collapse as water surged across the land. They must have run in panic, carrying what they could, abandoning the rest. They must have watched helplessly as the homes of their ancestors vanished, as the graves of their elders disappeared beneath the tide, as the world they knew ended in a flood that would never recede. This was not just a natural disaster. It was the destruction of identity, of memory, of history. What makes this moment even more haunting is its permanence. Floods usually recede. The land recovers. Communities return. But here, the sea never left. It claimed the land and held it. Those who survived had no choice but to move, carrying their trauma with them into distant lands. Some may have wandered westward into Europe, others south into Anatolia, others east into Asia. Wherever they went, they carried with them stories of the deluge, stories that became myths, myths that became legends. A people drowned, but their memory endured through the tales they told around fires, through the warnings they gave to their descendants. Modern science reinforces these narratives. Sediment layers on the seabed show sudden transitions, proof of a rapid and violent influx of salt water into what had once been a freshwater environment. Shells from different eras, preserved in those layers, reveal a sharp break, a before and an after. In a geological instant, a thriving ecosystem was destroyed and replaced by a new, alien world. What was once fertile and green became dark, deep, and suffocating. The science confirms the story. This was no myth. It was real. And yet, the mythic quality of the event is unavoidable. It is not hard to see how the survivors, scattered across continents, turned their trauma into stories of divine wrath, of gods angry with mankind, of floods meant to cleanse the earth. To them, it must have felt like punishment, like the end of the world. Imagine explaining to your children why the land of their ancestors was gone forever. Imagine trying to make sense of the impossible. Perhaps the only way to understand was through story, through the language of myth. The Black Sea flood reminds us of the fragility of human existence. Civilizations depend on the stability of the earth beneath their feet, the predictability of rivers and rains. But when that balance collapses, when the sea itself rises against you, there is no defense. You flee or you perish. The survivors of the Black Sea carried their memory not in monuments or texts, but in fear, in legend, in stories told to warn future generations. And those stories reached us, carried through thousands of years, disguised as myths but grounded in catastrophe. When we look at the Black Sea today, it is hard to imagine the violence of that moment. Its surface is calm, its waters stretch endlessly toward the horizon. But beneath that calm lies a truth. Once this was not a sea, but a home. And its transformation into what it is today was not gentle, but brutal. The waters came with a force that reshaped not only a landscape, but the trajectory of human history itself. Beneath the calm waters of the Black Sea, fragments of another world remain. They do not rise like grand temples or pyramids to announce their existence. They linger quietly, half buried in sediment, scattered across the seabed like whispers of a forgotten story. Archaeologists who have dared to explore these depths describe scenes that feel less like ruins and more like echoes. A ceramic jar resting on its side, its surface coated in silt. A wooden beam preserved in the oxygen-depleted waters, still holding its shape after thousands of years. Stone tools lying in patterns that suggest deliberate placement, the remains of hands that once shaped and used them. These are not monuments to power. They are fragments of lives ordinary, fragile, human. It is this ordinariness that makes them so haunting. One can imagine the rhythm of daily existence before the flood. Farmers harvesting grain along the fertile plains. Fishermen casting nets into what was then a freshwater lake. Families sitting around hearths, telling stories, building traditions, believing their world was secure. Then the waters rose and everything changed. What we now recover from the seabed are the frozen remnants of that moment, lives cut short, histories interrupted. Every artifact is more than an object. It is a voice breaking through the silence of millennia, saying, "We were here and we mattered." The discoveries challenge our assumptions about what these people were capable of. Were they isolated villagers living simple lives, or were they part of a larger cultural network, exchanging ideas, tools, and beliefs? Some artifacts suggest surprising sophistication. Patterns carved into stone hint at symbolic thought. The presence of imported materials suggests trade routes stretching farther than we expected. Even the arrangement of dwellings reconstructed from remnants indicates planning. Not chaos, a sense of community that was structured and deliberate. Could this have been more than scattered settlements? Could it have been the outline of a civilization advanced enough to leave an imprint that still whispers to us through the water? The tragedy of the Black Sea flood is not only that it destroyed a world, it is that it interrupted a story before it could finish. Imagine if the flood had not happened. Would these people have developed into one of the great civilizations of antiquity? Would they have built cities, carved monuments, written texts that shaped the course of history? Or would they have remained a regional culture, remembered only in traces? The flood leaves us with questions we cannot answer. It leaves us staring into the silence of the sea, wondering about what might have been. And yet, even in silence, the traces endure. The sea did not erase everything. It preserved enough for us to sense that something important was lost. The artifacts are like lanterns in the darkness, faint glimmers that refuse to die out. They remind us that history is not only written by those who endure, it is also carried by those who vanish. The Black Sea's drowned world is proof that absence itself can be powerful, that even the smallest fragments can stir our imagination and force us to reconsider what we think we know about the past. When we recover these artifacts, we are not just retrieving objects. We are reconnecting with voices silenced by catastrophe. We are acknowledging that lives once lived beneath the waves still matter, still resonate, still demand to be remembered. The traces of a lost world are more than archaeology. They are a mirror reflecting the fragility of our own civilizations today. For if their world could vanish so quickly, what does that say about ours? Before the waters rose, the shorelines of the Black Sea were not remote or forgotten. They were vibrant landscapes, alive with movement, exchange, and human presence. The basin that now appears as an isolated stretch of water was once a hub where cultures met, a corridor that linked east and west, north and south. Archaeological and geological research suggests that these ancient coasts were fertile and rich, attracting communities who built their lives on farming, fishing, and trade. To walk along those ancient shores would have been to encounter a diversity of people, languages, and beliefs, all converging in one of the most dynamic crossroads of prehistory. Imagine travelers following the routes that circle the basin, carrying goods crafted in distant lands. Shells from the Mediterranean, obsidian from Anatolia, grains cultivated on fertile plains, objects that speak of networks stretching across continents. The Black Sea shorelines were not isolated villages living in obscurity. They were part of a greater web, a living artery of human interaction. These coasts may have served as the birthplace of traditions, the testing ground for innovations, the frontier where ideas merged and gave rise to new cultural identities. It is difficult to comprehend how interconnected the ancient world already was, but here, along these now drowned shores, we find evidence that people were never as isolated as we once imagined. The flood that consumed these landscapes was more than a geological event. It was a cultural severing. The rising waters did not simply erase farmland and homes. They cut off networks of exchange, dislocated populations, and shattered connections that had bound people together for generations. When communities fled, they did not carry only their possessions. They carried stories, fears, and memories. They carried fragments of rituals and beliefs that would take root in distant lands. The migrants who left the Black Sea basin may have seeded myths and traditions across Europe, Anatolia, and beyond, leaving traces of their lost homeland embedded in cultures far removed from the disaster itself. Some scholars believe this explains why flood legends appear in so many parts of the ancient world. Survivors carried the memory of catastrophe with them, embedding it into the cultural DNA of the places where they settled. What they could not preserve in stone or writing, they preserved in story. Each retelling kept alive not only the trauma of destruction, but also the memory of a shoreline that had once been a center of life. Thus, the forgotten shores of the Black Sea continue to echo even in traditions recorded thousands of years later. What is particularly haunting about these coasts is the scale of what was lost. This was not a single village or a scattering of huts, but an entire region of settlement. The flood erased landscapes that had been cultivated for centuries, coastlines where people had built their world brick by brick, ritual by ritual, generation by generation. To us today, the map shows only water, but to them, it was home. Imagine standing on a bluff watching the waters claim the land, knowing that every field, every grave, every memory was vanishing beneath the tide. That vision of loss must have burned itself into memory with a force too great to forget. Modern explorations of the seabed reinforce this vision. Sonar scans reveal the outlines of valleys and coastlines now hidden below. Divers have recovered remains of settlements suggesting long-term occupation, not temporary encampments. The evidence is clear. These coasts were central to human life, not peripheral. Their loss was catastrophic not only for the people who lived there, but for the entire network of interaction that flowed through them. The flood did not simply take land. It disrupted the very structure of the ancient world. And yet, the memory of these shores lingers in silence. The Black Sea today appears as a barrier, a division between regions. But once it was the opposite, a link, a gathering place, a hub. When we look at its waves, we are not seeing only water. We are seeing the burial ground of forgotten connections. What lies beneath is not simply archaeology, it is the shattered remains of a crossroads where humanity once thrived. When divers and researchers first began to probe the depths of the Black Sea, what they discovered was not merely scattered tools or fragments of pottery. They began to see shapes, patterns, lines of stone that suggested deliberate placement, remains of posts that once held structures, walls, and platforms that hinted at human design. These were not random debris carried by the flood. They were the bones of architecture, preserved beneath the silence of water. To confront them is to realize that those who once lived here were not merely survivors on the edge of subsistence. They were builders. Architecture is more than stone and timber. It is intention. To build is to imagine permanence, to declare that a place is home and that life will endure there. The submerged structures of the Black Sea whisper of that same ambition. Some appear to be dwellings, modest in scale, yet carefully planned. Others hint at communal spaces, perhaps areas where people gathered to trade, to celebrate, to honor their dead. If these impressions are true, then the drowned coastlines were not clusters of temporary huts but organized settlements, expressions of a culture that thought beyond the moment and into the future. This discovery unsettles the neat timelines we often impose on history. We like to think of human progress as a slow climb, simple shelters giving way to villages, then cities, then monuments. But the ruins beneath the Black Sea suggest something more complex. They imply that advanced construction and community planning may have appeared earlier and more widely than we once believed. Could it be that a civilization with its own architectural tradition flourished here, only to vanish without leaving monuments above the surface? If so, then our understanding of early human achievement may be incomplete, distorted by the accidents of survival and loss. Consider the emotional weight of these structures. Each stone placed, each post anchored, was an act of hope. These people did not build for collapse. They built for continuity. Yet the waters came, sweeping away not only their homes but their vision of the future. To walk among these underwater ruins is to feel the dissonance between human intention and nature's indifference. What was meant to endure for generations lasted only until the sea reclaimed it. Divers describe the eerie beauty of these submerged architectures. With the sweep of a flashlight, what first appears to be natural stone reveals itself as walls. Shadows resolve into corridors. The line of a foundation becomes clear against the seabed. In the silence of the deep, these ruins evoke both awe and sorrow. Awe at the ingenuity of those who built them, sorrow at the fate that erased their world. The experience is like entering a ghost city where every empty frame is a reminder of the lives once sheltered there. These underwater ruins raise questions larger than themselves. Were they the homes of farmers and fishermen, or were they part of something more complex, a proto-city, a nucleus of a culture that might have blossomed into one of the great civilizations of history had it not been erased? We cannot know for certain, but the possibility alone is staggering. If the Black Sea truly holds the remains of such a society, then the narrative of human progress is not what we have always believed. It is not a straight line from Mesopotamia to Egypt to Greece. It is a web with strands that stretched further, deeper, and earlier than we realized. Some strands survived. Others, like those beneath the Black Sea, were severed by disaster and left buried in silence. And yet, silence is never complete. It is broken by story. Across the world, cultures far removed from the Black Sea tell tales of floods, stories of gods punishing humanity, of waters rising to cleanse the earth, of survivors escaping to rebuild. The Epic of Gilgamesh speaks of a flood that nearly destroyed humanity. The Book of Genesis tells of Noah and his ark. Greek myth remembers Deucalion and Pyrrha, who repopulated the earth after a deluge. Even in faraway traditions, from India to the Americas, flood myths appear. Could all these stories be independent inventions, or do they trace back to a shared origin, a memory of catastrophe carried across continents by survivors of a real event? The possibility is difficult to dismiss. Imagine the refugees fleeing the Black Sea flood. They scatter in all directions, seeking new homes. They settle among distant peoples, and in their attempt to make sense of what happened, they tell the story of the sea that rose without warning, swallowing everything. To them, it must have felt divine, inexplicable. The flood was not just water. It was judgment, chaos, the wrath of powers beyond their comprehension. They told their children, who told their grandchildren, until the story became myth. And myth endured, shaping religions, cultures, and identities long after the details of the event were forgotten. This is what gives myths their power. They are not invented from nothing. They are memories distorted, symbolic, but rooted in truth. The flood myths of the world may not be coincidences. They may be collective trauma, retold and reshaped until the original event was obscured but never erased. If so, then the Black Sea is not only a site of archaeology but of memory. It is the origin point of stories that still define human culture today, but myths alone cannot prove history. For that, we turn to science. The Black Sea has become a laboratory where technology meets mystery. Modern archaeology no longer relies only on divers with flashlights. Today, researchers deploy remotely operated vehicles that can map the seabed with precision. Sonar scans create images of valleys and ridges that once lay above water. Robots glide silently through the depths, transmitting pictures of ships and structures untouched for millennia. Each technological advance brings us closer to piercing the veil of silence the sea has maintained for thousands of years. The discoveries have already been astonishing. Entire ships from the Byzantine era, perfectly preserved, rest intact on the seabed, their masts still upright, their ropes still coiled. These finds confirm the unique preserving power of the Black Sea's oxygen-deprived depths. If ships can survive so flawlessly, then what of the homes, the tools, the bodies of those lost to the flood? Somewhere beneath the sediment may lie entire settlements frozen in time, waiting for the right technology to uncover them. The thought is electrifying. We are on the edge of discoveries that could rewrite history, discoveries that may reveal not only the existence of a drowned civilization but the shape of its life, its art, its beliefs. And yet, with each advance, the mystery deepens. The more we see, the more we realize how much is hidden. The sea is vast, and exploration is slow. For every ship we find, for every artifact retrieved, there are countless more waiting in the dark. The Black Sea guards its secrets with patience, revealing them only in fragments, as if to remind us that history is not easily surrendered. We are left with the sense that we stand on the threshold of revelation, that the greatest discoveries are still to come. The Black Sea is not just water. It is a mirror reflecting both the fragility and resilience of human existence. It shows us how quickly civilizations can vanish, how entire worlds can be swallowed without trace. But it also shows us how memory endures in artifacts preserved by silence, in myths carried across continents, in the curiosity that drives us to keep searching. To stare into its depths is to confront our own vulnerability, to realize that the stability we take for granted is an illusion. The earth shifts, the waters rise, and history can change in an instant. Finally, we arrive at the conclusion of this journey. The calm surface of the Black Sea seems deceptively ordinary. But now we know that it is not calm. It is heavy, weighted with memory. Beneath those waves lie stories untold, lives unremembered, civilizations erased. The sea holds them in silence, preserving them not for those who were lost, but for us, the living, who still have the chance to listen. The Black Sea reminds us that history is fragile. It can be drowned, buried, forgotten. But it can also be recovered. What if the greatest chapter of human history has yet to be read because it still lies beneath the waves? What if the true origins of our myths, our religions, our sense of who we are remain sealed in the depths, waiting for us to return? The sea asks us these questions. It dares us to dive deeper, to search harder, to accept that the story of humanity is not finished. It is still unfolding, one discovery at a time. The Black Sea is not just a sea. It is a time capsule, a silent witness, a civilization erased but not forgotten. And as long as we continue to search its depths, as long as we refuse to let silence be the final word, its secrets will not remain buried forever.